Do you also cry from hunger? Asked the 10-year-old black beggar to the millionaire, but he was mourning his son. The rain fell relentlessly on the streets of Manhattan when David Thompson, CEO of the largest financial technology company on the East Coast, collapsed in tears in the middle of Wall Street. At 42 years old, owner of an estimated fortune of $2 billion, there he was crying like a lost child, soaked and completely emotionally broken. That's when a small figure approached him. A black girl of about 10 years old, barefoot and wearing ragged clothes, held in her hands a piece of stale bread that would probably be her only meal of the day. "Sir, are you crying because you're hungry too?" she asked with devastating innocence, holding out half of her bread to the man in the completely soaked $3,000 suit. David raised his bloodshot eyes and met the child's worried gaze. For an absurd moment, the richest man in New York was being comforted by someone who clearly had nowhere to sleep that night. "No, little one," he replied, his voice breaking. "It's not hunger." "Then it's longing," she said with a wisdom that didn't match her age. "My grandmother always said there are only two kinds of tears, hunger tears and missing tears." David felt as if those simple words had pierced all his millionaire defenses. Today marked exactly 1 year since he lost custody of his son Michael to his ex-wife, who moved to London, taking the 8-year-old boy away from him. "What's your name?" David asked, drying his face with the back of his hand. "Destiny," she replied with a smile that revealed 2 missing front teeth. "And you?" "David." "Nice to meet you, Destiny." The girl studied his face for a few seconds, as if assessing whether she could trust him. Then, with a decisive gesture, she broke the bread in half and insisted on offering him a piece. "I can't cure your longing, but I can share my bread," she said. "Food shared always feeds the heart more than the stomach." David accepted the piece of bread, feeling a lump in his throat. Here he was, one of the most powerful men on Wall Street, receiving charity from a child who probably hadn't had a proper meal in days. "Destiny, where do you live?" The girl's smile faded slightly. "Everywhere and nowhere," she replied with disconcerting maturity. "Since my mother disappeared, I've learned to fend for myself." "Your mother disappeared?" David couldn't hide the concern in his voice. "About 6 months ago. She worked cleaning offices in buildings like this one." Destiny pointed to the fintech solution skyscraper behind him. "One day she ate some chocolates that an elegant lady gave her, and then she became very strange. The next day, some men in suits came to get her, saying they were taking her to the doctor. I never saw her again." David felt a chill run down his spine. There was something disturbingly familiar about that story, but he couldn't put his finger on it. "And no one took care of you after that?" "They tried to put me in a shelter, but I ran away. The kids there fought a lot, and the adults didn't care about us." As they talked, David discreetly observed Destiny's ease with her surroundings, how she knew every corner of that area, how she seemed to have mentally mapped out all the safe and dangerous places. A 10-year-old child surviving alone on the streets of Manhattan for 6 months. "Destiny, do you have a place to stay tonight? It's going to rain a lot." She shrugged with a gesture that seemed to be her trademark. "I always manage. There's a gap under the overpass that protects me from the rain." David made an instant decision. "How about coming to dinner with me? I have an apartment nearby, and I promise it's safe." Destiny's eyes narrowed suspiciously. On the streets, she had learned not to trust adults' promises easily. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." The direct question hit him, but the answer came naturally. "Because you shared your bread with me when you thought I was hungry. Because today is a very sad day for me, and you made me feel a little better. And because no child should be alone on the streets." Destiny seemed to consider this for a few moments. "Okay, but if you try anything weird, I'll scream and run." "Fair enough," David agreed, standing up and holding out his hand to her. As they walked through the wet streets toward his apartment on the Upper East Side, David couldn't help thinking about the disturbing coincidence. A black child, alone on the streets, whose mother had disappeared after eating chocolates given to her by an elegant lady. There was something about this story that bothered him deeply, a feeling that this chance encounter wasn't so chance after all. But what intrigued him most was the feeling that Destiny was hiding more than she appeared to be, as if, behind that innocence, there was someone who understood much more about the world than a 10-year-old should. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what is about to unfold between David and Destiny goes far beyond a simple act of charity, and the truth about her mother's disappearance is closer than anyone could imagine. David's Upper East Side apartment occupied the entire top floor of a historic building with panoramic views of Central Park. Destiny entered slowly, her eyes wide, taking in every detail of the luxury that surrounded her, from the grand piano to the artwork on the walls. "Wow," she murmured, "it's like those movies where rich people live." David smiled, but inside he felt a tightness in his chest. All that wealth hadn't been enough to keep his son close. "Would you like to take a hot shower while I fix something for dinner?" While Destiny showered, David took the opportunity to make a few calls. The first was to his personal lawyer, Thomas Mitchell, one of the best criminal defense attorneys in Manhattan. "Tom, I need to talk to you urgently." "Not on the phone. Can you come to my apartment in an hour?" "Of course, David. Has something happened with Michael's custody case?" "No, it's complicated. It involves a missing child and possibly fintech solutions." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "David, you're worrying me. What exactly are we talking about?" "1 hour, Tom. And bring everything you can find on child abduction protocols." The second call was to Rebecca Chun, Director of Corporate Security at Fintech Solutions. Rebecca had worked for the FBI for 10 years before being recruited by David, and her loyalty was unquestionable. "Rebecca, I need you to discreetly send me a list of all contract cleaning staff from the last 2 years, especially black women between the ages of 25 and 40. Is this related to an internal investigation?" "Maybe. And Rebecca, keep this between us for now." When Destiny came out of the shower wearing a bathrobe David had found, she looked like a completely different child. With her hair clean and her face washed, her resemblance to someone bothered him, but he couldn't quite place it. "Destiny, do you remember your mother's full name?" "Jasmine Washington," she replied, sitting down at the table where David had prepared a simple dinner. Everyone on the street called her Jazz. David almost choked on his coffee. Jasmine Washington. That name was familiar, very familiar. During his monthly executive meetings, he always reviewed reports from outsourced employees. He had seen that name recently. "Destiny, what floor of my building did your mother work on specifically?" The girl frowned, trying to remember. She always talked about a very high floor where important meetings were held. She said she could sometimes hear important people talking through the doors. David's blood ran cold. The 42nd floor, where Fintech Solutions' executive meeting room was located, where only 5 people had unrestricted access: himself, Vice President Victoria Ashford, Chief Financial Officer James Harrison, Human Resources Director Patricia Wells, and, did she mention any specific names? Anyone who gave her the chocolates. Destiny thoughtfully nibbled on the sandwich he had prepared. She said she was a very elegant lady with gray hair always pulled back in a tight bun. She wore expensive glasses and always spoke to all the female employees as if they were dumb children. David felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. The description fit perfectly with Victoria Ashford, his 58-year-old vice president, who had been his mentor when he founded the company 15 years ago. Victoria, who had helped him build a financial empire. Victoria, who had full access to all of the company's systems. "Destiny, did your mother ever mention hearing anything specific at these meetings?" The girl's eyes narrowed slightly, and for the first time David noticed an intelligence far sharper than he expected from a 10-year-old. "Mr. David," she said carefully, "do you think the lady who gave my mother the chocolates is the same person who works at your company?" The direct question surprised him. Destiny was connecting the dots with a speed that impressed him. "It's possible," he admitted. "And if it's true, we'll find out what really happened to your mother." At that moment, the intercom rang. It was Thomas Mitchell. "Tom is here," David announced. "He is my lawyer and a person I trust completely. Can you repeat everything you told me to him?" Destiny nodded solemnly, as if she understood the importance of the moment. Thomas Mitchell was a tall, thin man with gray hair and piercing eyes that had intimidated prosecutors in court for decades. As David recounted the situation, the lawyer listened silently, occasionally taking notes. "Let me get this straight," Thomas said finally. "An outsourced employee at your company disappears after eating chocolates given to her by someone who may be your vice president. Her daughter is left an orphan and survives 6 months on the streets. And you believe this may be connected to, what exactly?" David took a deep breath. "Tom, 3 months ago, Victoria started pressuring me to sell my majority stake in the company. She claimed it was time to professionalize management and bring in institutional investors. I refused categorically. And last week, she casually mentioned that it might be best for me to reconsider certain decisions before compromising information about the company came to light. Thomas and David exchanged meaningful glances. They both knew that in the corporate world, compromising information was often synonymous with blackmail. Do you think Jasmine Washington may have witnessed something during the meetings that compromises Victoria? Not only that, David replied, pulling out his laptop. Rebecca just sent me the list of outsourced employees. Jasmine Washington was officially fired on the same day Destiny said she disappeared. Alleged reason: breach of confidentiality protocol. Thomas leaned forward to examine the screen. That means Victoria knew exactly who Jasmine was and had a motive to silence her. There's more, David continued, browsing through the company's internal files. Jasmine had been specifically assigned to clean the executive meeting room every Tuesday and Thursday. Always on the same days Victoria held her private strategy meetings with outside investors. Destiny, who had remained quiet throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. My mother always said that powerful people do bad things when they think no one is watching. She was seeing something she shouldn't have, wasn't she? The wisdom of that observation left both men silent for a moment. David, Thomas said gravely, if your suspicions are correct, we're talking about a conspiracy involving the elimination of witnesses to cover up corporate crimes. This is much more serious than a simple power struggle. David nodded, but his eyes flashed with a determination Thomas recognized from the courtroom, the look of someone who had decided to fight, regardless of the consequences. Tom, I want you to prepare everything to request temporary custody of Destiny. Officially. And I want you to hire the best private investigator in New York. And unofficially. David smiled, but there was no humor in that smile. Unofficially, Victoria Ashford has no idea who she's really up against. She knows me as the successful CEO and absent father. She has no idea what I'm capable of when someone threatens an innocent child. While Thomas jotted down notes about the next legal steps, David watched Destiny, who was quietly playing with a puzzle he had given her. The girl occasionally glanced up at the adults with an expression that seemed to understand much more of the situation than she should have. There was something in those eyes, an intelligence, a maturity forged by the need to survive, that made David suspect Destiny was also hiding important information. Perhaps her mother had shared more with her than a child should know about what she had witnessed at those meetings. Each new discovery only intensified his conviction that this chance encounter in the rain had not been accidental. Victoria had completely underestimated the power of truth to emerge from the shadows, and now she was about to discover that separating a mother from her daughter had been the biggest strategic mistake of her career. Over the next 3 days, David Thompson transformed into something Victoria Ashford had never witnessed before, a quietly meticulous and dangerously focused CEO. While she believed she had intimidated him with her veiled threats about compromising information, David was secretly building the most devastating case of his career. Rebecca Chun had become his most valuable ally. Not only did the former FBI agent confirm that Jasmine Washington had worked specifically on the days of Victoria's private meetings, she discovered something even more sinister. 3 other contract employees had been terminated for breach of confidentiality in the last 2 years, all after working on the 42nd floor. David, this is no coincidence, Rebecca said at their latest secret meeting in his apartment. We're talking about a systematic pattern of witness elimination. Destiny, who had adapted surprisingly well to the routine in the apartment, was in the living room doing her homework when she overheard fragments of the conversation. David had managed to enroll her discreetly in a nearby private school, using his influence to speed up the bureaucratic processes. Mr. David, she called during dinner that night, can I tell you something important about my mother? David and Rebecca, who had stayed for dinner, gave the girl their full attention. Mom always kept important things in a little notebook she hid under our mattress. She said that when you hear things you shouldn't, you have to write them down so you don't forget. David's heart raced. Destiny, do you know where that notebook is now? When the men came for her, I managed to grab a few things before I ran away from the shelter. The notebook is in a backpack I hid in a safe place. Rebecca and David exchanged meaningful glances. If Jasmine had documented what she had witnessed, this could be the definitive proof they needed. Can you take us there? Rebecca asked gently. The next day, Destiny guided them through a series of alleys and underground passages to an old abandoned subway tunnel. There, carefully hidden behind a loose grate, was a small worn backpack. Inside, along with some clothes and family photos, they found a hardcover notebook filled with Jasmine's meticulous notes. The pages contained dates, times, names, and detailed summaries of conversations she had overheard while cleaning. October 23rd, Victoria met with men with Russian accents. They talked about moving money to offshore accounts. They mentioned laundering $50 million through shell companies. November 15th, Victoria arguing on the phone with someone named Martinez. She said that if he didn't cooperate, accidents happened to people who talk too much. December 2nd, Victoria showed photos of a bank account in the Cayman Islands to a man in a gray suit. She laughed, saying David would never suspect her because he trusts her like a sister. David felt his blood boil with every page. Victoria wasn't just trying to force him to sell the company, she was using fintech solutions as a front for an international money laundering operation. There's more, said Rebecca, pointing to the last entry, dated the day Jasmine disappeared. January 15th. Victoria found out I've been listening to her conversations. She offered me chocolates today, said they were special, imported. They tasted strange, kind of bitter. I'm feeling dizzy. If anything happens to me, Destiny is staying with the neighbor next door. Please, someone take care of my little girl. The silence that followed was broken by Destiny's small voice. She knew something bad was going to happen, didn't she? David knelt beside the girl, holding her small hands. Your mother was very smart, Destiny. And very brave. She documented everything so that one day the truth would come out. Meanwhile, Victoria Ashford was making the most arrogant mistake of her career. Believing she had neutralized any threat with Jasmine's disappearance, she intensified her pressure on David, sending increasingly direct messages about her intention to take control of the company. David, I hope you've reconsidered our conversation about professionalizing fintech as management. It would be a shame if certain tax irregularities at the company came to light just as we are negotiating with international investors. What Victoria didn't know was that David had discreetly installed monitoring software on all company systems. Every email she sent, every call made from corporate phones, every access to the servers was being recorded and automatically sent to Rebecca. Thomas Mitchell had put together an impressive legal dossier. In addition to evidence of money laundering, they now had documentation of attempted murder, kidnapping of a minor, corporate blackmail, and international criminal conspiracy. David, this goes beyond Victoria, Thomas explained during an evening meeting. The connections we found suggest a criminal network operating through several legitimate companies. Victoria is just one piece, but an important one. How long do you need to make sure that when we strike, she has no way to escape? 2 more days. I need to coordinate with the FBI and the Federal Prosecutor's Office. When we do this, it has to be perfect. That night, David tucked Destiny into bed and read her a bedtime story, as had become tradition. But this time, she surprised him with a question that caught him off guard. Mr. David, when you catch the bad woman who hurt my mom, will you still be my temporary dad? The simple question carried an emotional weight that hit David like a bolt of lightning. In just 1 week, this extraordinary child had filled a void in his life that he didn't even know existed. Destiny, if you want me to, I would love to be your dad forever, not just temporarily. The smile that spread across the little girl's face was brighter than all the lights in Manhattan. The next day, Victoria made her final mistake. Frustrated by David's apparent passivity, she called an emergency board meeting, planning to force a vote to remove him as company president. I need everyone to be present tomorrow at 10 a.m., she wrote in an email to all board members. We have urgent matters concerning the company's leadership that can no longer be put off. David read the email with a smile that Rebecca would later describe as absolutely predatory. Victoria had just dug her own grave by calling exactly the meeting he needed to expose her publicly in front of all the relevant witnesses. Rebecca, call Thomas. It's time to put our plan into action. And Destiny? Destiny will go to school as usual tomorrow. When she comes back, all this will be over, and we can finally start looking for her mother. Because David was sure that Jasmine Washington was alive somewhere. Victoria was too calculating to commit murder when forced confinement in a psychiatric clinic was a cleaner and more controllable solution. While Victoria slept peacefully in her penthouse, Believing that the next day she would finally take complete control of FinTech Solutions, David remained awake, finalizing the last details of a revenge that would be served with the surgical precision of a scalpel and the devastating force of a tsunami. For 15 years, Victoria had underestimated David, seeing him as a brilliant but naive young man who depended on her guidance. Now she was about to discover that she had created a monster, not of cruelty, but of relentless justice, and that the price for terrorizing an innocent child would be paid with compound interest in the form of public humiliation and total destruction. The FinTech Solutions boardroom had never witnessed anything so devastating. Victoria Ashford entered confidently at 10 in the morning, carrying a briefcase full of forged documents she would use to frame David for tax irregularities. Her plan was simple: force a vote of no confidence and take control of the company. "Gentlemen of the board," she began in her usual authoritative voice, "I have called this meeting to discuss the incompetence of leadership that is putting our company at risk." David remained calm in his chair, watching Victoria expose herself more and more. At his side, Thomas Mitchell waited for the right moment to act. "I have evidence that David has been making questionable decisions that could compromise our international investors," Victoria continued, opening her briefcase. "I believe it's time for a change in leadership." That's when David slowly stood up. "Victoria, how interesting that you mention international investors. Especially considering your secret meetings with Russian criminal organizations." Victoria's face paled instantly. "What are you talking about?" David motioned to Thomas, who activated a projector. The first page of Jasmine Washington's notebook appeared on the screen, with clear handwriting documenting the conversations about money laundering. "This is the handwriting of Jasmine Washington, the contract employee you eliminated because she heard too much," David said with a coldness that made Victoria recoil. "That's ridiculous. I never." October 23rd, David read aloud. Victoria met with men with Russian accents. They talked about moving $50 million through shell companies. The other board members exchanged shocked glances. Victoria tried to compose herself, but her voice trembled. "Anyone can fake notes." Thomas Mitchell smiled predatorily. "That's why we brought the recordings." The audio filled the room, Victoria's unmistakable voice discussing illegal bank transfers, threatening witnesses, and planning to use FinTech Solutions as a front for international criminal operations. "Impossible. How did you get this?" "Rebecca Chun, our security director, installed monitoring systems throughout the company a week ago," David explained calmly. "Every phone call, every email, every access to the servers has been recorded." Victoria looked desperately around the table, but found only horrified faces of the advisors. "You don't understand. I built this company together with David." "You built a criminal scheme using my company," David corrected her. "And when Jasmine Washington found out, you poisoned her and had her committed to a psychiatric clinic under a false identity." The door opened and 2 federal agents entered the room. "Victoria Ashford, you are under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, attempted murder, and kidnapping a minor." Victoria tried to run, but tripped over her own arrogance, falling onto the conference table. "David, please. We can work this out. I taught you everything." "You taught me to recognize people like you," David replied, watching as the handcuffs were put on her. "And you taught me that sometimes justice needs a little help." As Victoria was dragged down the hallways screaming about her innocence, David turned to his advisors in silence. "Gentlemen, I apologize for allowing a criminal to infiltrate our company. But I assure you that starting today, FinTech Solutions will be a model of corporate transparency." Rebecca Chun entered the room carrying more documents. "David, we found Victoria's offshore accounts. $2.3 billion in illegal transactions over the last 5 years. The silence in the room was deafening. Victoria Ashford, the respected matriarch of Manhattan business, had just been exposed as one of the biggest financial criminals of the decade. "And Jasmine Washington?" David asked. "We have the location of the clinic. The rescue operation is scheduled for this afternoon." David smiled for the first time in days. Destiny would have her mother back. Victoria would lose everything: her fortune, her reputation, her freedom. And he had learned that underestimating a father desperate for justice was the most expensive mistake any criminal could make. But as Victoria was taken away to face decades in prison, one final question remained that would determine whether all this revenge would be worth it. Would Jasmine Washington be able to fully recover from years of forced sedation, and what kind of reunion would await mother and daughter after so much suffering? 3 months later, David watched Destiny and Jasmine playing in the garden of his apartment. Jasmine had fully recovered from the forced sedation, and mother and daughter now lived as her official family. The adoption paperwork was finalized. "Daddy David," Destiny called, running up to him. "Mommy said I can choose the decor for my new room." Daddy David. 2 words that filled the void that a year of separation from Michael had created. In fact, Michael would be back next month to meet his new sister. Mariana had agreed to regular visits after seeing how David had changed. FinTech Solutions was thriving under new ethical leadership. With Victoria no longer sabotaging decisions, the company had doubled in value in 3 months, attracting global investors impressed by the radical transparency David had implemented. Victoria Ashford, on the other hand, was facing 25 years in federal prison. Her assets were confiscated, her reputation destroyed, her former allies abandoned her completely. The woman who had once controlled Wall Street now languished in a cell, financially and socially broken. "You know," Jasmine said over dinner, "when I was in that clinic, I kept myself alive by thinking about Destiny. I never imagined I would find not only my daughter, but an entire family." David smiled, watching the 2 people who had transformed his life. Victoria had tried to destroy him through blackmail, but she ended up giving him the greatest gift possible, a family. The real revenge wasn't destroying Victoria. It was building something she could never understand: genuine love, a real family, and success based on solid values. Sometimes life puts the right people in our path exactly when we need them most. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove that the best response to cruelty is to build something beautiful and lasting.